So there's no presentations or anything like that as such. This is much more about sort of us reflecting on the CPD series, but thinking how we would take that further. So I suppose one of the differences with the CPD series is we really want it to sort of inform practice and to make a difference. So we'll work through an activity that hopefully will help us think about that. But I just wanted to start by, oh, and I suppose the other thing I should mention, so when you attend the first 3 sessions of the CPD, you get an attendee badge to show that you've attended. And I will be sending out a little some details on how you can see your badges, and you can move them to wherever if you collect badges, to wherever you to your backpack of choice. But for the final session, for this session, it's actually about getting something called a champions badge. And so it's really, the whole point is thinking about how you'll put your learning that you've taken from the CPD series into practice. And then what you all you need to do is send to the Active Learning Network email address some sort of artifact to show that you've put it into practice. So it might be as simple as a lesson plan or something like that, or it could be something more reflective, so maybe a blog post or something like that. But we just need to see something that shows how you've put the learning from the CPD into practice, and then you get a champion badge as well. So I wanted to start off by finding out, now obviously we've done the CPD session over 3 weeks and maybe not everybody's been able to attend all 3, but so far what's been your standout ideas that have come out of the CPD series? Is there one thing that you that's really piqued your interest or excited you or inspired you?
I'll maybe go, Isobel, if that's okay. I liked the kind of mid-course check-in, just how are you feeling and that sort of thing. That was quite good, and I definitely wanted to use it in my own teaching.
Yeah, that's a yeah, one that I'd seen Rachel's presentation before, and it's one that I've sort of started, and it's that the other thing I liked about it is that idea of checking in how well how confident they understand the learning outcomes, which I think is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I can see the grading cats one somebody's mentioned.
It might be good just to go over the sessions and remind us all. Yeah, I certainly remember a great comment. It came from one of the sessions, which was a comment by Wendy about giving midterm feedback on the learning outcomes, which I just thought was a really great idea, sort of thing. So people start reflecting on the learning outcomes and they can see themselves in relation, their progress in relation to the learning outcomes, which that came out of the session. But yeah, I think we might, if we had a little recap on each of the sessions, might be useful if everyone else thinks that's a useful use of our time.
Yes, and Sarah beat me too. I'd got the page open, ready to share the link, and she was beating me too. So in the first session, we had the one that people have already mentioned, the perfect grade, how grading cats teaches us about student assessment. And I'm going to mention that a bit more in a minute, because that's one of the ones that's really stuck with me. Then there was active learning via 2-stage assessment approach. that was very much relating to a multidisciplinary undergraduate program. And then there was one about artificial intelligence learning simulation model. Now, for me, the biggest take home from that one was actually not anything per se to do with the session, but it was that idea of iterative assessment and thinking about it in terms of park run or a cycling time trial. That idea that you're thinking about how you improve yourself rather than comparing it necessarily to external factors like competing against each other. And that I thought was quite an interesting analogy that came out of that one. Then we had in session 2, we had Mary talking about using AI, and then we had the quiz session. So looking at a variety of different quiz tools, gamification that you can use. So that was another interesting one. And then last week it was assessment for learnings, so that co-creation using Mentimeter, seeing where the students were at before planning the next session, and then the co-creation of interactive e-learning resources with Linear and Smitter. So I don't want to spend too long on that because I have got a little activity for us to do. So this is based on something. So we, in September, we do a 5-day digital festival. And it's called DigiFest, but not to be confused with JISC's DigiFest. And we start, so this used to be in person, but after the pandemic, or during the pandemic, we stole the idea from the Global Festival and went to a morning and afternoon session for our DigiFest. And again, the last day of that, we really wanted to think about how people are going to take it forward, because you go to these sessions, you get all these ideas, but what do you do next? So one of the things that I developed with a colleague of mine, some of you will know, Beatrice Acevedo, was the idea of taking just one thing and then thinking, so with a nod to Michael Moseley, and thinking, well, you just need little habits. You just need, sometimes you get, there's all these great ideas, but where do we find the time? So why not take just one little thing and make a change? So that's what I want to think about today. And it will also be useful for, it can be as a basis of thinking about how we're going to take it forward, and that to use for the Champions Badge if you want to get it. So now I've done this on, you can do this electronically or however you want. This is where I go to paper and pen. So first thing I want you to do, and hopefully you can see this, is why I've got no fancy background today, so I can show this. Does it mirror actually? Because obviously it looks mirrored to me, but it might look fine to you.
It's okay.
So the first thing I want you to do, if you have a pen and paper handy, or as I say, you could do this electronically if it suits you better, but think about what, and that's why I sort of started off with that sort of like, what was one thing you remembered? What one activity or idea, so it might not be directly the same as what that person did, but have like one thing that you think you might like to change or develop. So that's what I want you to do to start off with. I'll give you a minute or so to do that.
Sorry, Isobel, can you just repeat that? Sorry.
I'll just give you a moment to do that.
To do.
Oh, so you need to think of that one activity or idea,
Right.
and make a note of it somewhere, ideally, either electronically or on paper. So I started the next bit already, so I have to ignore the bit at the bottom. So I've put an activity where students grade or rank animals based on criteria to what have I written? Animals based on criteria to extend their assessment literacy. That's what I've. So the activity that Mark did with the cats, I'd like to do with my students as an introduction to assessment criteria, because then I give them. So at the moment, I just give them examples and assessment criteria to example of the actual assessment. But actually, I think they need to understand a bit more about assessment criteria. So this might sound like a negative way of thinking about this, but it does seem to work. The next thing I want you to do is write down or think about any obstacles you might think like there might be to you doing this. So it might be around knowledge. I'm just seeing somebody who's written about AI, you know, certainly for me that I want to do a lot more with AI, but it's so rapidly moving. So it might be something like that. What might be the obstacles to you taking that idea further? So Roberta's put time, which I think is probably on most of our lists. So on my list, I've got will students engage, preparation time. So have I actually got time to sort of like think about it and prepare it? And the other one is having the right technology. And I'll explain more about that in a bit. But so we saw Miro being used. I do use Miro occasionally. I have found some instances where students have found it, especially if they're neurodiverse, can be very busy with all the things moving around all over the place. So it's sort of like thinking about the right technology to be able to do that. And I can see Salma's put the same thing in the chat. So, and this is the bit I like. So the next bit is to think about, with these obstacles, what can we do to address them? So what can we, how can we overcome these obstacles? Yeah, I think Roberta's caught the essence of this. Use ChatGPT and or make small change at first. So yeah, you know, that idea that we only need to make small changes. We don't need to go, you know, absolutely mad with this. And I can see Sam will put how to overcome a 10-day ALN sessions to get feedback on crazy ideas. Yeah, and getting that feedback is always useful. But and one of the things I've written is getting that from students as well. So talking to them, sort of get their, you know, to help get their buy-in. Yeah, Troy's put about what if what if it turns out the students hate the module? I suppose it's about finding out why, isn't it? It's sort of what can you you know, what's happening, and but actually, is that likely to happen? So is it more actually a fear of that happening rather than actually that's what you expect to happen? The one that's easier to write down than actually do, I've put set time aside in my calendar, so block out time to just, and it doesn't need to be again, because we're only making small changes, this doesn't have to be a vast amount of time. And then with the technology, I've put about experimenting. So hopefully you've thought of some of those ways you might overcome those issues. So the next thing I want you to think about is, what would you gain from doing it? So what would be the benefit? What would be the gain that you that you would get from doing it? So that's what you need to think about next. So has everybody done that bit? So I've put students have better understanding of the assessment, students are more confident in the assessments, in their assessments, and students have better understanding as to why they achieved the grade they did. So certainly, I'm holding up the wrong bit of the paper. Certainly the students I've worked with where we've done marking exemplars have been much happier with their feedback. And I think it's because they can see from the feedback and from the assessment criteria where they got their mark from. So the next one I want you to think about is what would I miss if I didn't do it? What would, you know, because I suppose the last thing is it actually, you know, one of the things you have to think about, is it really worth us doing this? So if I didn't do this, what would I lose out on? So again, I put students might not be do as well in assessment, and students might not be satisfied with their achievements on the module. I didn't like to just put they might not like their mark, but hopefully at this stage you think, well, it's worth doing something with this. If at this stage you've got to the point where you think, well, actually the obstacles are too high and I couldn't find ways to overcome them all, and what I gain from it doesn't outweigh that sort of the what might I lose from it, that almost tells you, gives you a gauge of, actually I should take this forward. And then that just leaves you with the final step of how are you going to break this down into really easy steps of what you can do. So and I might actually just share my screen now. So interestingly, because I've already I'd already set my assessments up with the assessment criteria. I didn't really want to go back over that this trimester. So, but I teach a module called Do We Own Animals? So it fits well with the whole idea of grading cats. But I was just last week I taught about the socio-zoological hierarchy. So what I got my students to do now, if I can work out, yeah, no, I can. So my trouble is I don't use Zoom enough. So hopefully you're now seeing my screen. So I did this with my students and got them. I actually did it as a pre-activity, much like, so I was this is a bit of an amalgamation between what Rachel did and what Mark did. So I got the students, I didn't give them any criteria with which to rank the animals. I just gave them the 7 animals. And this is where Mentimeter changed, because and this is why I say I need to test out the technology, because in the past you could put an image for each of the things you wanted to rank, which is what I wanted to do. But I might go back to using Miro or something like that as an alternative to this. And because of the fact I can't use images. But I just carried on with this as it was and got the students to rank the animals as they saw fit. And then we could discuss this and discuss the ideas around what made different people, why did more people put dog as their highest ranking animal than any of the others? And it was actually quite interesting watching this change as more people filled it in. And then we were talking about some of the sociological reasons why rats and snakes tend to be at the bottom of any order of animals. But the interesting thing was how many of my students had to Google what a pangolin was, because they weren't aware of what a pangolin was. And then we talked about, whether did some people grade it on whether the animals were more intelligent than others, and others did it on how cute the animals were. Obviously, whether you have the fact, if you don't know what a pangolin is, you're much less likely to put that as a high ranking animal. So it really was sort of like an amalgamation of of 2 separate activities that this was like new this year, and I never thought to do it before, but it was inspired by those 2 things. Right, if I stop sharing. So sort of like that's almost like one of my first steps was to have a go. It might not be the exact activity I did, but unfortunately I'd intended to have it finished for today. I've started writing a blog post about doing this. And one of the things I thought it would be as I started writing the blog post, I thought this will be ideal where we're trying to get students to write their own assessment criteria. It'd be a great way to introduce assessment criteria and what they need to look like. So does anybody else, so now you've sort of seen my process of doing this, and sort of I've talked that through, and I know people have been writing in the chat. Does anybody want to share what they did, what their ideas were? Probably easier to do over the microphone. Obviously, if anybody's written anything, you can hold it up to the camera, but just happy for somebody to talk through their ideas.
I'll go. We have a new faculty academy that we run. Our time frame is about an hour and a half. For about 10 weeks, we have new faculty come. We tried to structure it where we have a PowerPoint and discussion for no more than the first, 30 or 40 minutes. And then we break out into groups and do some kind of active learning each week. The other thing that we do with this is we try to model what they could do in their classroom for student engagement and different things that they could do. A lot of things that are discussed here with the Mentimeter, Kahoot, all of that kind of stuff, but then just even putting prompts up on different stations or having different workstations for the faculty to go through. Those are some of the things that we do.
Yeah, I think you'd.
Yeah, that's right. I was maybe going to share my my document, what I'd done actually, so that might work. Just to kind of go through it. Let's see this one. Yeah, so obviously it was about Mentimeter, and I think a few people have kind of felt that was quite useful. So for me, I'm going to use this with the next session I've got, and it's called Contextualising Your Educational Inquiry. It's a course on getting staff doing the PG CAP to engage critically with educational literature and SOTL. And sometimes I've got a sort of issue at the moment that some of them, because of work pressures, aren't necessarily engaging, they're not all doing the formatives. My obstacles for that were time in the live session to do it, perhaps lack of confidence in implementing the activity, students not being confident of their ability to measure the attainment of learning outcomes or how they're feeling about the progress. So the overcoming obstacles was do the activities as an asynchronous activity outside, but before the live session, make it supportive and low risk, make it clear that they're not identifiable. And I was thinking for the next session, but actually there's a final Q&A session. I think that would work even better there. What I would gain, more meaningful reflection on how teaching is going, a more student-centred approach, more supportive to learners, can tailor a generic session towards their individual needs. And if I didn't do it, I would lose the opportunity to catch students at risk of failing or performing poorly. May not be able to move the learning activity of the course, and for me, not being able to have that meaningful dialogue. So I kind of think maybe writing a blog post might be a way to kind of encapsulate this, because I'm halfway there. Thank you, Izzy.
Yeah, and that's all great, and it's that you've got the perfect framework for a blog post there, so it's really good. Anybody else want to share what they're going to do as a result? Well, I missed a lot in the chat.
I think Troy's got a hand up.
Oh, Troy, yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind. I mean, maybe I mentioned some of it in the chat already. And as I said, I haven't seen the first 3 sessions yet, so I'm learning this very much as I go. But I really liked those prompting questions. So I was thinking about having a mid-module review of learning outcomes. I've got one right at the beginning where we talk through what students think of the LOs. But I think having one in the middle will be really useful, maybe one at the end as well. For some of the fears or barriers, I'd thought about what if it felt too abstract, and not everything would be covered necessarily by the middle of the module. But I was thinking there about, well, I can try and make very specific examples so that I can prompt students if they don't think of those aspects. And about not everything being covered, I think really one of the things that I've learned a lot through my recent CPD is about setting expectations and managing expectations. So trying to make sure students are aware of that. And we discussed the, what if they hate it? Well, at least I know and maybe have the opportunity to do something about it. And I thought that, so the gains here were about getting some extra student buy-in to the learning experience, seeing how what they're doing connects to where they're going to be, the chance to change a bit if necessary, particularly because this is a course that I've not run before, so I'm developing it for the very first time, and hopefully also something about improving the relevance and authenticity of the learning. And then I think the last question there was, what if I didn't do this? I thought risk of some students maybe receiving a shock at the end of the module where they felt, okay, I don't quite see why we're here. And that students might not necessarily understand and see the value of the things that they're doing. So I think, yeah, it really convinced me that this is something worth doing.
Yeah, and I think it'd be really fascinating to see how the student, because as you said, you're partway through the module, the stuff you haven't taught yet. But in a way, is that you'd almost expect them maybe to be more confident in some learning outcomes than others based on what you've already taught them. And it'd be really interesting to see, is their confidence and understanding the same as what you would expect it to be? And then how can you use that to reflect on your own teaching and what what you need to cover? And the only thing that it strikes me with all of these activities that I tend to use, one of the things that worries me, and I don't know whether anybody else finds this as I suppose as an obstacle, is if the students aren't used to doing these types of activities, if other people aren't referring to learning outcomes in the same way, for some people the learning outcome is just something on a form, like we call them module definition forms, in my previous institution it was module specifications, and I'm sure some teachers hardly ever refer to them, maybe in the very first session, and then don't ever refer to them. They appear on the assignment briefs and whatever. But how much, would it be alien? And I suppose some of that's knowing the course with which you teach in. I know a lot of us sort of work more in academic development, so we'd expect people to be on this. But the module I teach on is a cross-institutional module, so I have modules from all 4 faculties. It's so interesting to see the different experience of students from different faculties. So anybody else want to share their ideas? Has everybody got an idea now they think they're going to take forward?
I can just share very quickly because you probably can guess what I'm going to say, but on the back of Linnea and Smita and Drew's resource, we're currently thinking about our pre-arrival platform for students coming into Sussex. So I'm looking to see how this genially works, using the resource as a sort of starting point for looking at how we might sort of do something similar at Sussex. So at the moment we've got a whole group looking at the pre-arrival platform, so I've shared the resource with them and they are all absolutely raving about it. So I think going forward, Glasgow comes to Sussex is going to be the way forward. We're going to use the resource and see if we can sort of do something on similar lines. So yeah, my knowledge of genially is the thing I need to crack on and try and explore a bit. So yeah.
Wendy, that doesn't sound like a little thing though.
It doesn't.
I suppose one of the things that I suppose we could all take from that though is the fact that you've got the whole team on board with it. You've taken it out to, so it's one of the things that can make a big thing smaller.
I think the key thing is, like, we've struggled to sort of think, what should we put on the platform? How would it work? you know, we've gone round in circles really, and then suddenly this resource is like, well, look, you know, this is sort of the sort of thing that we could do. It's just, you know, click here, click there. It sort of takes you to what you need to know. The information's really, so it's given us a real sort of a good starting point to thinking, right, now how do we move forward at Sussex with some sort of similar ideas? So it's really sparked a lot of interest and enthusiasm. I think it's sort of broken our cycle of doom. So yeah, it's a lot of work to do, I think, but yeah, it's just really been quite inspiring.
Yeah, and it's one of those really nice things that's really to me, is at the heart of active learning, about where students are teaching other students. You know, there's so much, the trouble I find is the older I get, the more removed I am from thinking like a student. I can remember trying to teach elements of genetics to first years, and it's so long since I remember, you know, I can't remember not knowing, if you know what I mean. So trying to think how to explain it to a student in the language that a student understands is really difficult. And I think when they're much, you know, so I've used students teaching, like peer teaching, I've been such a fan of peer teaching, because I think once that, you know, and me being there just to make sure that they're giving them the right information, it's just so invaluable, because they talk in a language that each other understands much better.
I think so, but it's really interesting that we sort of, I think like the student perspective is constantly changing as well, because we're finding at the moment that we've gone sort of full circle from going completely over to e-publications. And now students are going back to the old thing of, you know, we prefer reading a book, or we prefer printing out this reading and reading it from the text. It's really interesting that we've gone sort of full circle. So I think it is good to have that co-creation, because, you know, where we're at in terms of student preferences and what students are looking for just seems to be this constantly changing thing. You get used to one sort of approach, and then you find out actually things are changing again, and then you have to modify it. So I think just having the students on board is really key, I think.
Yeah, but what has fascinated me, I've taught out several courses where I've taught the same module on consecutive days to different cohorts, and it's so fascinating how one day, you know, I'd fill the whole session and wouldn't be able, because there'd be so much discussion and so much interactivity. And then the next day, the whole session, it would take a third of the time, because I couldn't get the engagement from the students. And I'm thinking, this is the same material I delivered yesterday. It was, it's fascinating that the differences between different cohorts as one thing. Anybody else? Paolo, I saw you come off mic before, and I didn't know whether you wanted to share yours or.
I was only briefly gonna say something about AI tools, and that I'm finding that I'm quite often wanting the pro version when I'm playing around, which is sort of an issue because I don't necessarily want to spend my own money. So there is a question of whether your institution is buying into buying AI.
Yeah, and that's really interesting from the point of view. So it depends whether you're using it to produce teaching resources, or whether you're thinking of students using it, because again, one of my big worries is how it will increase the digital divide between those students that can pay for pro AI to those students who can't. So
yeah,
it's a really interesting.
I guess you're right, yeah, and I think that's kind of where this institution is coming from. But then, sort of leading on, if the students don't have it, or other members or faculty don't have it, then we don't need it. Which seems like, I feel like, well, maybe we need to be a bit ahead of the game.
Yes, and it's really interesting, because I mean, I think it's going to be, yeah, the more, you know, again, going back to, I mean, we've started using Adobe Express as part of because we're becoming an Adobe Creative Campus. And that's got AI for generation of little, like, so we've made some little videos. It's one of the things that's on my to-do list, is to make some for my module teaching. And it's sort of one of those things that sort of we without replacing teachers with AI, it can really, you know, there's ways that we can develop resources. You know, we're using AI hugely in our immersive teaching rooms. So we've got some of the igloo rooms, and AI is critical for that, because to generate the videos that we need to make to use in those spaces. So yeah, it's thinking how we can, you know, there's a difference to using it like what we'd expect students to use it with, and us generating materials to support learning and teaching. So has anybody else, we haven't taken the full time slot, but does everybody feel like they've reflected somewhat? And
Linnea had her hand up.
I missed that, sorry, Linnea.
That's okay. Sorry, I'm jumping back to a conversation that Wendy was having. And Wendy, I'm just speaking with Smeet off screen here. We've made another resource that we're going to put onto NTR, but it might be very helpful for you. But it's a map to explore our building and campus, but with 360 sort of vision, sort of context in it. So that I was just thinking that might be helpful with what you're doing. So we'll share that. And I was just going to say that I absolutely love these questions, and I'm writing them down because this is such a good chance to reflect with this order of questions that Isobel, that you've presented to us, to get us more confident maybe to do something. And just to share my weird thing that's going on in my head. I'm starting a lecture course next week. I've done it before, and the issues that I have is it's a module in a series of modules. So we only have, well, we've got 9 contact times 2, it's twice a day, but 6 lectures. And the students are trained up by each of the previous ones on what to expect. And a lot of it, it's the normal didactic. And I'm really contemplating, I wanted to do this for ages, is flipped learning. But it is really hard to know if the students will engage, if they will attend. But I do think that it's actually, for chemistry, it's a really good way of learning, because then they are supposed to watch it and then I can do problems with them. And so they have 6 sessions of problem solving and support, which to me sounds better. But I have to say, to be honest, in the back of my head, as I was thinking, what if they hate it? What if they don't turn up? What if they do this? But from what we learned from Drew, and what Smita and I learned is, and this, I have to say, we get this from so many of our students that we were just having conversations with, saying lectures are pointless. And they keep saying this, lectures are pointless. They use lectures to learn from them, but they would rather actually be doing something. And it's repeated over and over again, that where they actually learn is maybe tutorials. So it's problem solving sort of things. So all of these things are coming in. I've been thinking about, I've used Menti, but I like the check-in Menti. I want to see what to do with cats, because that's always a good draw card. And even if I can get Sarah there on screen with her cat walking through, that would be marvelous. But it's finding the courage to do something. And your final question of what would I miss out if I didn't do this? I think it would be fear, it would be anxiety, but it would be also the joy of actually finding out how it works and helping the students. So anyway, I will shut up now.
But what a brilliant way to finish. I love that the joy, sometimes, when active, and I know it doesn't always work, but even then I find sometimes there's still something positive, there's a buzz to it. And there is, when you do active learning, there is it releases endorphins, I'm sure it does, because there's such a buzz to it, and you do feel a joy of when you've seen that learning happening in your students, which you don't see if you're lecturing at them. And it's funny because I often tell the story of my own experience of learning many years ago at Aberystwyth. And I used to go to lectures to find out what I had to learn about, not to actually learn anything. It was almost like that just told me what I needed to then go away and learn about, rather than actually learning anything in the lectures itself. So but yes, I love that idea of the one of the things we miss out on is that. And again, the work I've done around assessment criteria, what I've really enjoyed is how much the students seem to enjoy doing their assignments more, if that makes sense. I'm not sure they ever really, but there's more of a buzz. Again, there's more of a, I suppose, more engagement, and that's, you know, there's something really nice about that. So has anybody got any questions, and does everybody feel that there's something they can take now?
I've got a question, if I might. Something I'd be interested to hear from the group. If you start doing something different in your teaching compared to your colleagues, how do you manage that kind of relationship? If people are saying, well, why are you doing something different? Particularly if it looks like something like hard work and maybe they are worried they might start being asked to do more work. If anybody has any experience kind of trying to find a way to turn it into a positive for everybody, I'd love to hear about that.
I'll jump in. I think it's important to go ahead and try those things, and then people will usually get on board because they see the success of it, even though it might be a little bit more work or a little bit more setup, whatever that might be. When they see the engagement of the students and that the students are like learning a little bit better and some different things like that and being successful, I think it kind of transfers over. I say go for it. Even if there's some pushback from the others.
Oh, sure.
And it's interesting. I just want to add, you know, in our new faculty academy, like I said, we did a lot of different activities and things like that. And there was this one session, this one instructor said to me, you know, I didn't really like that activity when we were doing it, but do you have the resource? Because I could really see how I could use this with my students. And I just thought that was really funny because, again, the students too sometimes might push back and say, oh, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to participate. But then once they do, they also find that they enjoy it as well.
Yeah, it's a great question, Troy. And I mean, as Wendy says, one thing I found is that the best way to get other staff to do it is when you do it and then the students really like it and then the students drive it. That really does seem to work much better than any sort of stick approach I've seen used at other institutions. And again, with some of the others I've seen with students, I found it quite challenging sometimes when I've been the only person doing active learning, and it's very interesting hearing the students' reflections as well. So they will all generally say they have learned, most of them think they've learned more, which is quite interesting because that's not what all the literature says, because some of the literature says that students think they learn more when they're being lectured at, despite the evidence to suggest otherwise. But some of them did say they really enjoyed it, and others did say, well, I did prefer it when I could just come to my lecture and stare out the window, which because they had to do the work, they're having to do the work, whereas quite often in a lecture, what are they doing? Because we know, we don't concentrate. I mean, I know what it's like when I go to sessions. So yeah, really interesting. But yeah, be brave. Right. Has anybody got any other closing comments? Now, we have recorded this session. I don't know what others feel, how we go about sharing it, because obviously a lot of it has been our own discussions. Is anybody happy with us? Is there anybody not happy with this sharing it as is? I'm not sure how much use it would be for somebody else to watch it as is. but I suppose I just wanted to check with everybody before we decide how much editing we're going to do and before we share it. And really, the only other thing is to say, have you got any feedback on the CPD series as a whole? Any, you know, obviously it's something we will plan to do in future, and obviously any feedback we get from people, we obviously have the feedback forms for the first 3 sessions. I don't think we normally do a feedback form for this session, but really sort of what, you know, anybody got any ideas of changes or what would make it more useful? There's always part of me that thinks we need to it's asking the people who don't come as much as the people who do, because I'm assuming you see some value in it. But yeah, any feedback is much appreciated. You can either contact Sarah, Wendy, myself, and Paolo directly, or obviously tell us in this forum. But yeah. Is there anything else we need to add, Wendy and Sarah?
I think the only thing is, Isobel, is to say that we will need to follow up with people to say how and when they need to submit the artifact to get the
Yes.
And we will be sending an email around the network about that. Yes,
so don't feel this is something that you need to do in any sort of hurry. I mean, obviously the only thing is what we've tended to find is people who do it in the first few weeks after the CPD are much more likely to do it, and then it sort of gets forgotten about. But equally, this could be something you do, so, you know, sometime later in 2025, you know, but it would still be great to hear about it. And the other thing is, there is opportunity, obviously if you've got access to, like, either you've got your own blog or like the University of Glasgow obviously have their blog, at ARU has its own one as well. But if you haven't, there is the Active Learning Network blog as well. So we you know, if you send something in, we can publish it there, share it there. So that's an opportunity.
That was going to be my question, is there going to be a way to share activities or information as a result of this workshop?
Yeah, and if you're if anybody's happy, what we can do is if anybody publishes something in blogs elsewhere or resources or anything else they're willing to share, we can add those to the CPD page on that's already on the ALN website. But yeah, as I said, if so, because obviously the more you can get, like, that would link out so that people could read it from there. But as I said, the other thing is there is the option to put something on the ALN blog itself. Okay, well, thank you all very much for your time today. I've certainly enjoyed myself and learned a few more things, and you know, I found the process useful, and I'm guessing from the feedback that others have as well. So thank you very much.